We are recording this session so that we can post it to the Commission's YouTube channel so that you can share it with others, and others who are not able to be with us today in person can access all of the great information that's going to be shared with you today.
And here we go.
So we're going to start with the PowerPoint as it's coming up. And this is, as I mentioned, a part of our series called Digging Deeper. And it's an opportunity for those of you who join us to engage with evidence-based best practices that come out of our performance assessment work with candidates. And so this is an opportunity for us to provide some expertise from faculty and instructors and supervising teachers and those who support candidates to all of you, and an opportunity for you to discuss your best practices with each other. So we are excited to get this one started. Today, we will be focused on developmentally appropriate practices around social emotional learning. So we'll start with some introductions. I'm Amy Rising, the Chief Deputy Director for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and I'm joined by my colleagues. So I'll start with Gay and go through and let each person say hello. Gay Roby.
Hi all, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think you are going to find it is a very fascinating 90 minutes to engage in your best practices and some learning as well.
James Webb.
Good afternoon, James Webb. So excited that you can be here with us today and share these very special strategies and hear from actual practitioners in the field on what are best practices in the classroom. So welcome to our speakers and also welcome to everyone in the audience.
And Cassandra Henderson.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad you're here and glad to be here with you. I'm looking forward to learning with you today.
And Heather Kennedy.
Hi, I'm Heather Kennedy. I am very excited to be with you all here today. This is one of my personal favorite topics.
And Zoltan Sarda.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited about what we're doing today and looking forward to the conversation with you all. So with that, a couple of norms for today. Your microphone has been muted just to keep background noise down, but if you're asked, you can unmute your microphone to speak. We really view these as a collaborative opportunity. You're engaged sort of as the audience, but you are also have amazing background and experience and expertise in all these subjects. So we would like you to use the chat. First of all, to start, enter your name and affiliation for attendance purposes. We'd like to keep track of who's here and how many folks we have in these meetings. But please use the chat feature to comment on things that are going. Again, contributing ideas, asking questions, suggesting research, strategies that your program uses in regard to this work. Again, we're focusing on Cal TPA, so Teacher Performance Assessment, and Cal APA, both. We really see that there's a link between both working with students and working with administrators and with principals and teachers. Again, we would like you to focus on general questions rather than program specific or candidate specific ones. Avoid multitasking to ensure that we're being productive here, and then honor time for both participants and presenters by moderating your participation.
And before I go on to today's speakers, I would like to mention in the chat, just before you started adding all of your names and affiliations, I put the link to where you can reach today's materials. We will be using breakout rooms chat features later on, and we wanted to be able for you to be able to reach out and touch those materials. And well, remember when they said that, and go back and look at it. So the link is there for you. There's several really good resources, as well as a copy of this PowerPoint for you to use. So today, when we are focusing on social emotional learning in an age appropriate manner, we are welcoming a plethora of really outstanding people. First up, we're going to have Emily Miller. She is a social emotional learning teacher, and she's also a mentor. She said she loves those mentoring tasks at Canyon High School in the William S. Hart Union High School District. And so we welcome her first, and she will be followed by Heather Kennedy. We have stolen her from the William S. Hart Union High School District just recently, and she's a new consultant with us on the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And they were both mentioning they have both graduated from William S. Hart High School District, as well as gone back and worked for them as well. And then our third speaker, unfortunately, had life happen in the midst of his planning on being here. So in absentia, we are going to be representing Brent Kirkendall. And so Zoltan and I are going to highlight some key points of his article. And I'm sure he would do a much better job than we are going to do, but we hope we'll provide you with some insights into his work on trust in leadership at schools.
Okay. So we're really focusing again on this problem of practice of social emotional learning and development. And so this problem of practice for programs and for us as a commission as well is what are the skills and knowledge do today's teachers and administrators need regarding social emotional development and relationship building as they face our current world paradigm. And we're really, in all of our conversations over the last couple of years, we've had huge conversations about, issues of having to do with COVID. There's all kinds of social issues happening in the world. Even climate issues are part of it. We're in a very complex period of history right now, and that impacts the work that we do. And so what are those skills and knowledge that we need to prepare beginning teachers and administrators with? And we're going to try moving forward to use the global term of educators through the rest of this presentation. And then the second question is, what can preliminary programs do to ensure that candidates develop those skills and knowledge that are needed? So again, just some of those things that that highlights of what we mentioned. This first one comes up a lot, that over the last couple of years, because students have not been in schools, that they've been less socialized over the last couple of years. Brent, in a conversation with him, he was talking about his high school. He feels like a lot of the students are really engaging in a lot of immature behavior. That's a new problem for high schools. So we see that across grade levels. There's less opportunity for teachers and administrators to have been in person as well over the last couple of years. With the stress going on, many teachers and administrators are experiencing burnout. That work-life balance has changed for many people and how we work. And just again, as I mentioned, there's a great deal of uncertainty in the world related to many issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Miller, and she is going to focus on some of the work that she focuses on in her classroom. So take it away, Emily. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Miller, and like Gay and Zoltan were describing, I am a social emotional learning teacher from Canyon High School in the William S. Hart Union School District. I feel so lucky to be one of the few teachers who actually gets to teach social emotional learning as my course content. So I am solely a social emotional learning teacher. I teach 5 sections of the elective social emotional learning. I have 4 sections of an AB or a first year class, and then 1 section of a year 2 class. So actually returning students from last year. And before I really get started, I just first want to say how honored and grateful I am to be sitting in a room of very experienced and veteran educators. As someone who is only a few years out of my preliminary preparation program, I can just truly attest to the amazing work that you all are all doing to raise the future of education and raise future educators. So first, I just want to start with that. Thank you so much for everything that you do, and for being here to learn about this really important subject. So I'm sure that you are all, familiar with by now, social emotional learning is becoming a more widely known subject in the field of education. At least this trend in pushing more social emotional learning practices. But as a class, as me, teaching this solely, it is newer for some people to hear. So for those who may be hearing social emotional learning for the first time today as a class, please allow me to introduce you to the remarkable subject that is SEL, or social emotional learning. So SEL is the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. So in short, the goal of SEL, the goal of my job at least, is to create self and socially aware self-managers with responsible responsible relationship and decision-making skills. Sounds pretty easy, right? It's easy task. No, actually, it is quite big, and I feel the weight of that every day. But in having to teach such a weighty subject, I have realized that the cornerstone and the foundation of my class is exactly what we're going to be talking about today: how to create safe and effective classroom environments. My subject only works if my classroom feels safe and feels comfortable for students to share their experiences and to share their very honest and real moments. And one of the biggest parts of my class is actually sometimes introducing students to this idea that they do in fact have these little things called emotions that come into play often in their life. So I would actually like to engage you in something that I do in my class every single day to help introduce my students to those emotions. And that is this tool that comes from Yale's Center for Emotional Intelligence, their curriculum that they created to support social emotional learning in education. And that is the mood meter. So every single day in my classroom, I ask my students to identify their current emotion, to check in, I say, with their mood. So I'm actually going to ask you all to participate with me as well. If you could please take out your mobile device, and you're actually going to scan the QR code on the screen there. When your screen prompts you with a link, go ahead and click on that link, and you should be taken to the Mood Meter website. On that website, you are going to be asked two questions. One question, first one, will be to rate your current level or your current energy level. So on that grid that you see once you scan the QR code, you are going to find a graph, a colorful graph, and if you rate your energy level on a +5, so this is how I explain it to my students. At a +5 level, your energy is where someone who might be running a marathon, or this is what I say, hopefully someone who's running a marathon or prepared to run a marathon, they have the energy of a level 5. They are ready to party, bust a mission, like they are hyped. -5 would be, you are struggling to get out of bed. You don't want to move. You don't really want to do much. So that should help you with your energy level. And then your pleasantness. It's going to ask you your pleasantness. After you rate both of those, it is going to give you some emotion word choices. So go ahead and choose which emotion seems the most like what you are feeling right now. And then if you are comfortable, I would love to have you share either or what quadrant color, so you'll be given blue, green, yellow, or red, and or the emotion word that you use to plot yourself today. So I'll go ahead and give you a couple of minutes or a couple moments here to plot yourself on the mood meter. And then if you're comfortable, share with us in the chat. Go ahead and just say what color you plotted yourself or what emotion word you used to describe your current emotion right now. Awesome. Thank you, Linda. Love it. Yellow and optimistic. Awesome. Great, Connie and Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for participating there. Blue and tired. I love it, Sarah. I feel you. I identify. Yellow and encouraged. Lovely. Thank you, Julie. Feeling hopeful. I see overjoyed. Lots of yellow. Some red and blue. Yes, yes, discouraged. I understand. I feel that. And Sarah, blue and feeling pressured. I love it. Thank you all for your honesty and your vulnerability here too in the chat. I know that's hard to do. Great. I'll give you a few more moments. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. If you participated with that, if you used the mood meter for the first time today, I hope that you enjoyed that. One of my favorite parts about the mood meter is that, especially in my subject, I'm not only introducing students to the idea that they do have emotions and that they feel different things. You know, sometimes they feel sad, sometimes they feel happy, sometimes they feel pressured and discouraged, like some of you shared today. What I love about the mood meter is it also gives them the option of defining some of those emotion terms. So if you, while you were playing with that, if you were looking, if you saw an emotion word there that you have not seen before, there's a little question mark next to it. And if you click that, it will define that emotion word for you. And so this is such a great tool for my students, not only in, you know, learning and growing their vocabulary of emotion words, but also just really like truly understanding what they mean or what it means when they say that they're feeling discouraged or when they say that they're feeling pressured. Well, thank you so much for everyone for participating in that today. As I as I walk you through these various strategies that I want to share with you today, I want you to have a specific student in mind in the back of your head today. And that student can be described using the Focus Student 3 model that some of you may recognize from the TPA. So for those of you who don't know, the Focus Student 3 is a student whose life experience, either inside or outside of school, may result in a need for additional academic and or emotional support, and whose behavior in class catches your attention. For example, does not participate, falls asleep in class, remains silent, acts out, and demands attention. Life experiences may include, but are not limited to, challenges in the home, community, or school as a result of discrimination, bullying, illness, loss of parents, divorce, trauma, homelessness, poverty, or incarceration, or a student who has been negatively impacted due to religion, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, anti-Semitism, or heterosexism, or as a result of needs as a standard English learner, migrant, immigrant, or undocumented student, a self-identified LGBTQ+ student, or a student in foster care. And the reason I wanted to point your attention to this right now is because, as I mentioned earlier, I am only a few years out of my preliminary preparation program. And one of the questions I receive a lot is, what do you think was missing from your preliminary preparation program? And I do believe one of the discrepancies that I noticed from my own classroom that I am in now and the classroom that I was taught to teach in is really how to reach these students, really how to reach these Focus Student 3 students, or really just the student who has needs that you probably aren't aware of, because they bring them in what term that I was taught, their invisible backpack, the invisible backpack that they bring to school, that you don't see because it's stuff that happens at home. And really, I think what I learned the most from coming out of the pandemic and being an educator here is that sometimes students, for some students, school is their safe place. School is their escape, and I really try to lean into that that idea as much as possible in creating that safe and effective classroom environment, especially after coming after this pandemic. I know we've mentioned some of the speakers have addressed already, and they will address later. But I think one of the social gaps that I have noticed the most in my classroom this year is this resentment of structure. This is what I've decided to call it. The resentment of structure that has been in place for many years, but as students were online and learning through their computer screens for a year and a half of their education career, a lot of the structure that they were used to was gone for a while. So now that they come back, they're starting to, they like resent more of those consequences and the structure that's in place. So for a year and a half of their life, they could easily have not turned their camera on over Zoom, or if they did turn their camera on, I could have been seeing a whirling ceiling fan, or they could mute their camera on demand. They could show up whenever they wanted to and leave whenever they wanted to due to unforeseen technical difficulties. So now that I am the adult in the room telling them, no, you can in fact not pack up right now when we have 10 minutes left of the class, or no, actually, I would like you to not be on your phone during the entire 50 minutes that I have you, or no, you cannot show up and leave whenever you want. I really have found that they've kind of, there's a lot of pushback when it comes to that. So that is a lot of where I, come into today. How do you teach and how do you create an environment even given those circumstances? So today I'd like to share with you a couple of strategies that I've used in my own classroom environment, or that I use to create my classroom environment. You'll also hear me talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I will talk later on. And then before I leave you all today, I also want to share some research finding points that have noted the significance and the impact on social emotional learning on students. So to give you some practical strategies and some practical things that you can actually take back to your teacher candidates and your administrator candidates, I want to share some strategies with you that I use. First up, I know that this is one that is talked about in most programs, or you'll probably hear this often, but I cannot emphasize the importance of greeting your students at the door. I have found that this is the quickest way for me to identify how my students are feeling without any verbal exchanges. The second I see a student walk through my door, I am able to, through my own knowledge of that student, identify if they're in a good mood, if they're in a bad mood. If I have a student who barely can make eye contact with me, I know that something might be up, and that might be, that will be a sign that I can use and some information that I can use as I teach them that day. I often will use this as an opportunity to pass out papers as I stand at the door. So it's also just a really nice classroom management strategy, because I don't have to spend that time passing out papers in the classroom. But really, when it comes to creating a safe space and a place where your students want to come and look forward to coming to, I think the best impression is greeting them at the door, saying their name, acknowledging their presence, and asking how they're doing, really getting that quick assessment of what their mood might be before they even get to the mood meter. The next strategy that has worked really well for me is creating a randomized name system, and then giving my students prep time to prepare when they are going to be speaking in front of the class. noticed that especially after Zoom learning, when students could be muted for an entire class period, they really were not used to talking in class. And as a social emotional learning class, socializing is one of the biggest cornerstones of my class. I really try to take a backseat, and I want my students to be the leaders of discussion. But as they came back to the classroom, they really weren't prepared, and they really weren't open to talking. So I created, and I think this was something, I know this was something I learned in my preparation program as well. I wrote all of my students' name down on a popsicle stick, and I will just randomly, use that system to call their names. And then one of the most important things is I really try to give them even like 30 seconds to a minute of warning time to prepare them when they are going to speak. So for example, when we just did the mood meter, every single day, I asked 3 students to share the mood meter and share where they identified themselves. So to make it random, I will call on popsicle sticks, or I'll call them using the popsicle sticks. And when I know, I like to give that student a heads up, even if it's just 30 seconds to a minute to prepare themselves to talk. I found that they feel, safer. They have a few seconds to prepare what they're going to say. This lowers the risk while they're about to go in front of their classmates. And they tend to feel more comfortable. This has really brought many students out of their shell, I would say, especially those students who have more social anxiety and are more prone to get anxious when it comes to talking in front of their peers. This lowers that stress level as well. So not only randomizing names, but also preparing them, giving them some time to prepare. The next one is to assign students regular tasks and jobs. This was one of the most shocking to me because I did not realize that my students would enjoy the many jobs that I have to do in a class period, but I have seen the most transformation come from this strategy alone. For example, I had this one student who in the beginning of the school year really was difficult to engage with. I found that he was really just having trouble coming back to the structure of school. He's a freshman male, and I just had a really difficult time in terms of classroom management, in terms of trying to foster a relationship with him. There was a lot of pushback, and that turned into a lot of disruptive behavior, kind of calling out, and kind of going back to the focus student 3, like a perfect model of what that focus student 3 looks like. And one day I just decided to give him the task of turning on my 5-minute warm-up timer. He literally just had to click the play button on my computer screen and then stop the music that was playing as students were coming in. Just these 2 tasks that honestly took so much relief off of me and gave him a purpose and gave him a role. So he had buy-in of the class procedure process. Not only did I find that it gave him the responsibility, but I found that it gave him a purpose to show up to school or show up to class on time. He was coming in tardy before, and because that job required him to be there as soon as the bell rang, he looked forward to coming every day. And now will ask for other tasks and ask for other jobs. He wanted to be the PowerPoint pusher. But I find this one to be the most humorous, I think, because it really is a relief on the teacher, and honestly has created such a good relationship with those students. And the last one here is to meet them at their eye level. And I in parentheses, because I also think it's important to meet students at their level. One of the characteristics, or one of the strategies that I think was pressed upon me a lot in my prep program, and this is helpful for teachers or administrators in the room, to meet students at their level. I really try not to talk down to my students where I'm standing above them and I'm standing above them and they're, sitting in their seat. Anytime that I can, especially when it's a conversation, I try to talk to students and get down, like crouch down, sit in a desk next to them. So that way we are eye to eye and I'm not standing above them and they're not they're not standing below. I found that this has just been a really great way to like make us more equal in this space, so that way students feel more comfortable to share and to talk. So as I'm going through these and as I'm sharing these strategies, a lot of the psychology and a lot of the theory that comes behind this ties into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're familiar, American psychologist Abraham Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs. And in order to understand this, I know you're probably looking at this pyramid that you've seen many, many times before. But in order to understand Maslow's theory behind this, you have to understand that in order to achieve one of the upper, higher up needs, a student's needs must be met in the lower section. So before a student's cognitive needs can be met, they must fulfill their basic physiological needs. So for example, a tired and hungry student is going to find it very difficult to focus on learning. Or in order for a child to feel emotionally and physically safe and accepted in the classroom, this progress has to be they have to reach their full progress and potential in the lower zones of this hierarchy. So really keeping this in mind as I go about my teaching. If a student comes in hungry and tired and they don't have the supplies that they need, even if it's a pencil or a pen or a notebook, it's going to be very difficult to engage them in conversations about their emotions or what they did over the weekend, or try to, have them emotionally invested in the classroom. And so I know that as educators, this is, more taboo, and, I want to prepare my students. I want them to come prepared with pencils and pens, and I want them to come with everything that they need, which is, very valid. But I find that until those basic needs are met, I don't have their buy-in and I won't be able to match them or engage them in social emotional learning topics. So keeping this in mind as I engage my students has been very helpful, which helps with the last four strategies that I would like to share with you. The first one on here is asking if they are comfortable sharing. In the very beginning of the year, I tell my students that as a social class, I am going to be calling your name often. I have the popsicle stick set up and ready to go. And one of the first questions that I ask them is to tell me, or I ask them to tell me if they are comfortable sharing in front of their classmates. Now, I've done this every year. I've gotten a few people, maybe like 3 over 5 classes, who have reached out to me specifically and said, you know what, I would prefer not to, I get more nervous. I have more social anxiety in sharing in front of my peers. And so if I have a student do that, I know that there are other ways that I can engage them. I can, talk to them privately. I can have them share with me, but I also kind of use it as a beginning assessment. In the beginning of the year, this student is not comfortable sharing or speaking out. And then as the year goes on, I will, slowly try to engage them more. So by the end of the year, at this point in the year, I'm noticing that most of those students that reach out to me specifically, sharing that they do not feel comfortable, they are now more open, and they're some of my most active participants. So asking students if they are comfortable sharing, also going back to giving students prep time. For the students who aren't comfortable sharing, even maybe it just means that they need a couple of seconds to prepare before they go in front of the class. I think that would be helpful as well. The next one is being open and vulnerable about your story. This one may be more specific to social emotional learning as a class title. But in our class, we are sharing stories about a lot when it comes to mental health, a lot about stress and anxiety and what kind of emotions we go through. And in order to expect my students to engage in the level of maturity, I found that it is helpful to model what I'm expecting in my own stories in my own life. So I, have always felt it meaningful to be open and sharing my own life experiences, telling them what I did over the weekend, explaining my very unusual and rare aversion for ketchup and snakes, things that sort of like humanize you as a person, make you less scary and frightful as an educator. And I think, could work really well for administrators as well. Anything that can humanize you and make you less scary as a person will make them more comfortable in your space. Going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, trying to have supplies available. My one student who in the beginning of the year, was really difficult to engage with and now thrives on clicking a button to start class. One thing that I have realized is that in order to get him to engage, I have to meet him where he is, and he often will come with no school supplies, no pencils, no paper. And I have just found that it is easier to supply him with that. Just the other day, we were doing a writing prompt and I saw him struggling in the corner, and I realized that the only reason he was struggling is because he didn't have a pen or a pencil to write with. So I just quietly went over to my desk, picked up a pencil, put it on his desk, and then he was in and he was there motivated and active in that lesson. But sometimes that I realize is all it takes. And lastly, one that you will hear over and over again, fostering relationships. I would 100% agree with any educator who tells you that relationships is one of the best tactics in combating classroom management. I struggled a lot in the beginning of my school year with classroom management, but I realized that really I just had to give those relationships time to be created and to foster. And then most, not all, of my classroom management struggles kind of disappeared, or they were gone for the most part. But really, once you get the buy-in from the students, and once they realize that you are human and you're not trying to do anything, you're not trying to scare them or be an enemy in their life, they will help you and be there for you in that process. So those are a couple of strategies. And just to end in my time before I leave you all, since we are talking about social emotional learning today, I just wanted to share with you some of the findings that I have found in my own research, and as I have dove into the world of social emotional learning as a class. So just a few here things. Increased emphasis on self-awareness and self-management in the classroom teaches students how to regulate their emotions, exercise self-control, develop a growth mindset, and advocate for their own academic needs. So really the self-management and the self-awareness skills, if I can teach a student how to regulate their stress level or to self-regulate their own emotion, if they come into the classroom feeling very stressed and pressured from their school day and all of the homework that they have to do, teaching them coping strategies and skills, and not going home just to play video games, but to go home and to complete the tasks that are causing the stress. When they're sitting at home and they're given two options: to play video games for the rest of the evening or to work on the tasks that they need to complete. That is an element of self-control and a that's an ability for them to self-manage themselves. And then lastly, or one other fun piece of research is that students who can read facial expressions and assign an accurate emotion to them perform better academically. So I've actually found that in my year 2 students, so the students that I've had for 2 years now, we have seen GPA boost in their academic performance, which is honestly a really great testament, I think, not just to me and my teaching, but in teaching them these important skills. So for those of you in the room I know who are teaching the future teachers, and you are bringing up and raising future educators, one thing that I would recommend to you is to, before you send your teachers out into the field, really emphasize their own self-awareness. I think one of the things that makes me a effective social emotional learning teacher is because I have done the self-reflection and I have the self-awareness to know, when a child walks in and they feel incredibly anxious about something going on in their life, I remember and I dive, I dig back into the times where I felt anxious or I felt those emotions. So I understand where they're coming from. I know Heather is going to talk to you about empathy today. Really just understanding how to empathize with your students, I think, goes a really long way. So I know Gay has been sharing the link to the Google Drive. I've shared with you all a self-assessment, a SEL self-assessment that comes from CASTLE, or the Collaboration for Social Emotional Learning. So that will give you a pretty easy tool to do an initial assessment of your own social self-awareness, your own social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making skills, which I would encourage every one of you, if you have some time, to engage with that. But I just want to thank you all again for listening, and I hope that some of these strategies can be used in your own practices and your own teaching of the new teachers in the world. So thank you so much.
And Emily, you'll want to go in and check out the chat for the comments that we have.
Oh, okay. Do we have
Yes.
questions? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Emily, there was one question for you about, can you see the mood meter results like as the teacher? Is there a way to do that?
Yes, that's a good question. So I can see the number of participants with the mood meter. I can't see, and I can see where a student has plotted their emotion, but I can't see who it's from. So
Okay.
they are anonymous results, but I do see the number and where each, the group has plotted themselves.
And Julie, I think you were the one who answered that question. And before I came to work for the commission, I also used that strategy, but I sometimes would do it on a Pear Deck slide where then I could see who wrote what, in case I wanted to maybe follow up with a specific student. So that's another strategy that perhaps you could pass along to a teacher who might be interested in using that. Okay, and I think so much of what Emily just shared with us is applicable to if you're working in a leadership position, an administrative position, that fostering relationships piece, being vulnerable about your own experience and having that own self-awareness about your own social emotional state and keeping sight of that as you're working with other people. We ask teachers to do that with their students, and I think as people in leadership positions, we can do that with those who we are working with as well. So as we move into this portion of the presentation, what I would like you to do is take a look at the quote that is up on the screen. This comes from James Clear. He's the author of the book Atomic Habits. And with the context of that quote, I'd like you to think about what kind of teacher, administrator, leader, whatever role in education that you have, you would like to be. And in the chat, go ahead and type out your response. I want to be the kind of whatever role you picked, who, and you can fill in the blank. And I'll give you a moment to go ahead and do that. And is there a brave person who would maybe like to unmute and read out their statement for us?
I'll read mine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Yes, please share.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I was having a little technical issue on my end with my earphones. Sorry about that. My statement is, I want to be the kind of leader who empowers and guides others to their highest potential.
Thank you, Julie, for being brave and going first for us.
Absolutely.
And maybe if we could have one more person share their statement. And these are great in the chat. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have so much respect for that wait time. I'm going to go ahead and share mine. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I want to be, this is Linda Hoffman. I want to be the kind of leader who leads with empathy without being walked all over.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. All right. So as we've experienced in education the last couple of years, we have, and coming back, we have had a lot of post-pandemic challenges. And sometimes the reminder to take care of ourselves or practice self-care feels a little bit like we're sinking under, but it's like just this little like, don't forget. But it's really difficult sometimes. And so I wanted to sort of revisit some of the concepts that Zoltan talked about at the beginning with the challenges that we have experienced in all roles in education. So whether you are in teacher preparation, administrator preparation, classroom teacher, administrator, really any role. And we can go ahead and just take a quick skim of the concepts and quotes that are on these slides. And just think about these concepts. And the one that I am going to focus on today is the concept of empathy and how that fits into the workplace. And I think this fits in nicely with what Emily spoke about regarding Maslow's hierarchy and that emotional security. I think people need to feel that in the workplace as employees. And I think that students need to feel that in our classrooms. And so we're going to watch a brief video about empathy. It's just about 3 minutes. Zoltan, I think you might need to turn the volume up or unmute so that we can hear your sound.
Actually, I think I have to unmute. Sorry about that.
If I may, Zoltan, when
Yeah.
sharing the screen, we have to make sure we enable the computer sound. So you might need to stop sharing the screen and then reshare it and enable the sound.
Okay. Let's see. My apologies for this.
It will be down at the bottom left. It says share sound when you share.
Yeah, I see it. Audio settings. I should have checked this before.
It's okay. So again, share screen, and then when it brings up the different panes that you can share down in the left, You'll see bottom left, share sound.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, and now hopefully that will work. Thank you for the technical advice. Is that working?
Yes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So someone referenced in the chat that comes from Brene Brown's work on empathy. And this dovetails into her most recent work that she did on the way humans connect to one another, and ways in which we might accidentally cause disconnection with one another. And so this is the list of ways we might have what she calls empathic miscues. And we'll get into what those are. We covered the first one in that video, but we will talk about what those are. Also, just to tie back into what Emily talked about, this comes from her work in a book which she focuses on really naming emotions. And I think that ties in nicely to what Emily was speaking about related to having students really be specific about how they are feeling that day and defining how they are feeling. And so this is a nice complement to that as well, the work in this book that this comes from. So we can go ahead and look at what those empathic miscues are. Sympathy versus empathy was covered pretty well in the video. It's keeping that distance in the situation. Yeah, and in the chat, Julie, you said holding space for someone else is really powerful, and you have to go to that emotional place yourself, and that can be really difficult. And I think that that's really important as a teacher and as a leader if you are handling an emotional situation with either a student or a staff member. And then also judgment was covered in the video as well. And I think that those are important things to think about when somebody is sharing something with you that is very vulnerable. And a concept that I wanted to visit with this is the concept of something called near enemies, and this comes from Dr. Kristen Neff. And near enemies are related to these empathic misses because it's something that we think is getting close to empathy, but it actually is not exhibiting an empathic response, and it could cause more disconnection than doing something that is actually the opposite of empathy. And so I think that's why it's important to be really specific about what empathy is versus what it is not. So we can go ahead and go to the next set. Disappointment. This always makes me think of like as a child or as a parent, like when your parent, instead of being upset with you, which would be more of like a far enemy, they say they're disappointed in you about something, which is just, it doesn't necessarily lead you to wanting to share more later. If somebody says that they're very disappointed in you about something that might have been really difficult to share, maybe you made a mistake and you're owning up to it, and you share that. A teacher candidate shares that with or a teacher shares that with a principal, and there's that disappointment, and that might lead to that person not feeling comfortable sharing later, and that could be a really difficult thing for them to share. The next one is discharging discomfort with blame, either putting blame back on the person who is sharing the very difficult thing or looking for someone else to blame in the situation. We can go to the next one. Minimizing or avoiding, maybe telling the person that, oh, the situation really wasn't that bad, or you're exaggerating, everything's great, everybody loves you, you shouldn't be feeling that way about this. Just sort of discounting the way the person's really feeling about the situation. You think you're sort of trying to like give them a pep talk about it, but really it's not honoring the way the person feels in that moment. Comparing or competing, that's sort of the one-upping. Like, oh, you think this is bad, you should hear what happened to me. And making it more about you in the situation than what the person is sharing with you. The next two, speaking truth to power, when someone is sharing related to holding somebody accountable for something that was maybe very hurtful, and it causes discomfort or conflict, and the person they're sharing with says that they can't believe that they said that, or you can't say something like that because it makes them uncomfortable in that situation. And then the last one, which is my personal favorite, because I think this is the one I personally struggle with the most, is the advice giving and problem solving. Is that when someone comes to you with something, and because you care about them, you want to fix it for them. And so your first instinct is to like, okay, let's come up with like a 12-point plan on how we're going to problem solve this and fix it, and it's going to be done by tomorrow, and you're not going to have this problem anymore, and it's going to be all better. But really, instead of, maybe the person doesn't want you to fix their problem, and they just really want you to listen and be there with them. So now that we've talked about the empathic miscues, I think sometimes it can be really hard to know what to say in those situations. In the video, the suggestion is, I'm just really glad you told me. Something else you could say is, what does support look like for you right now? And I wanted to just tell a really brief story about a situation that I was in. So I just very recently left the classroom to come and work for the commission. And I was a special education teacher for a very, very long time. And I worked with an administrator the last few years who I think does this skill particularly well. And last fall, we were in an IEP meeting. It was a very lengthy one. It took multiple class periods, really difficult, really contentious, took all of lunch, the bell rang. I looked up at the clock and just was sort of like, oh no, like this has been multiple class periods, no lunch, and now I need to go into my co-teach class. And it's just been a really long day already. And she looked over at me and she said, why don't I take your class for you for the next like 20 minutes, and you can take some time, go eat, go to the bathroom. You can come down to your class when you feel ready to come back, and like you've decompressed and you can take your class back over. I was just like, okay. And that was you know, a really small thing, but it made a huge difference. And it really resonated with me of that was a really tiny way to offer support, but that was a very empathetic response to how I was feeling in that moment with what I needed. And I think that small things like that can make a big difference when you're working with people in education who are feeling a lot of stress in these really difficult times in this profession. So before we move on to some other topics, if we could just maybe have everybody share out 1 to 2 takeaways regarding empathy in the chat. And thank you. Yes, listening and being there speaks wonders. It's okay to sit in an uncomfortable space. And Gay and Zoltan, I will give it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And we're going to move on. Gay and I are going to very quickly cover. We're also going to end today with a good chunk of time for you to be in a breakout room together with some other folks to discuss some of what we talked about in your work. But again, this is we're going to summarize some of what Brent Kuykendall was going to talk about today. We really appreciated his work. And as Gay said, he would do a much better job of speaking to it than we will. But in your resources and on this copy of the presentation, there's a link to his article that he wrote with Charles Slater, which is really about servant leadership and this idea of trust. So Emily spoke about the understanding of students developing their emotional capacities and the relationship capacities. And Heather really spoke about this concept of empathy, which again, key to all this work, whether you're an administrator or teacher. And then that third piece is trust. And the thing that I actually really appreciate about Brent's work is that he's sort of brought some other pieces together from this concept of servant leadership into very simple sort of 3 pillars of this work. But this idea of what are the characteristics that build trust, that being benevolent, honest, open, reliable, and competent is really key. There's some huge aspects and positive needs for trust amongst school staff. I think we've all been in situations where we've seen somewhat lack of trust in organizations, and it doesn't create a productive and useful environment. But that idea of how can trust be compromised is partly somewhat what Heather was speaking about, also that idea of being overly prescriptive, being overly controlling. So the idea of managing through trust and managing through relationship, I think is a key part of Brent's work.
In his article, he does a very good job in citing resources, which is one of the reasons why we put it into our resources list, so you can see how he has built upon the work of others. But he talks about servant leadership as a culminating point that is built upon previous ones. So using distributive leadership, where we give roles to people to have power within the organization, or moral leadership that calls for schools to be places of both community and of trust. And then thirdly, the transformational leadership, where we introduce the idea of change, both in people and organizations, brings him to this positive school climate that he terms servant leadership, or they term it, both Brent and Charles. And there are 3 bullet points there that talk about how the servant leaders act within the school setting that changes the culture of the school and defines who and what they want to be.
Okay. There are some characteristics, again, as we mentioned in terms of servant leadership that Brent has outlined in his article. But again, these characteristics of that idea of love, humility, altruism, vision, trust, empowerment, service, and then those concepts of valuing people, developing, building the community, displaying authenticity. I think that really goes back to what both Emily and Heather were speaking about, providing leadership and sharing leadership. I think one of the key problems of practice for programs in developing administrators is this idea of how do we support candidates in becoming self-reflective so that they're able to forward these characteristics and engage with their staff around those pieces.
So the actual study that they conducted, they designed it and an interview-based qualitative research, action research. And the results really showed that the level of trust is the most significantly impacted by the principal and the principal's ability to show care, to communicate openly, and to model honesty with their teachers. And the implications they drew from the results of this study is principals who strive to become servant leaders will need to recognize these aspects of trust, and then deliberately act upon them to apply them when interacting with their teachers. From his study, he included this 3-column chart, which we have provided for you. And from the left-hand side, the characteristics of trust, it goes through the different models that he talks about. Into the 3rd column, when we say in the red text there, interviews confirm that these 3 are what teachers value the most when it comes to relationships with their principal and having a trusting relationship: benevolence, integrity, and openness.
And one of the things I really value about this work is that when you have 3 pillars like this, just, the benevolence, integrity, openness, they're really clear places for folks to get coaching. Is this a case of openness and skill and communication, or is this a case of your staff not feeling that you're benevolent in some way? So I think those are kind of really great coaching areas to focus on, and simple in a way to keep in mind. So what we've talked about today so far is the importance of understanding emotions and the need for social emotional learning among students. I think Emily's, I love that she brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it applies across whether we're working with children or adults. The idea of core individual needs, the important role of empathy in our work, and then this concept of trust and the concept of servant leadership as framing for how leaders can approach their work. So what we're going to ask you to do, we're going to have you to go into breakout rooms for, we got about, 15 minutes for the breakout rooms. But based on, these are some prompts that you can carry into your conversation or talk about what's important to you in the room. What should, first prompt might be, what should programs emphasize in their support of developing educator candidates? And we're including both administrators and teachers in this concept. In regard to social emotional development and relationship building, what similarities do you see between what teachers and administrators should know and be able to do? Share some of those practices and strategies that your programs are currently using. And then also maybe from this conversation and from conversations in your breakout rooms, what might your program add or revise to your approach? So with that, I'm going to stop my share. Okay, so welcome back, and hope you all had some good sharing time in there. We just wanted to either in the chat or you can unmute yourself just to some takeaways from today. We'd love to hear some things that you might have discussed in your breakout rooms. So if you can put those into the chat or unmute yourself, that would be great.
I'll say one thing in our group, Sarah shared about an initiative between the County Office of Education and the university that is working to combine the social emotional learning and universal design, the UDL. So I really like that idea.
That's great. And there's huge components of UDL that are related to social emotional learning.
I'll share for our team, I'll say. But I have to add before I share that in the 15 minutes we had, sounded like a lot in the beginning, but we were still on a roll chatting and we were like, we need more time, right? It was just really good. Our team was great. It was a good experience. I think I could safely say that for the team. Well, we addressed a lot of points in the time. One that we seemed to just kind of touch on the end was this idea of, which we heard right before we went into groups, leading through trust and how important that is, and how that piece really transcends to every aspect, of your school, and how that is seen and felt and heard, right, in so many different ways, and how that manifests itself is something that in that whole SEL, right, bubble of everything we talked about, empathy and sitting with people, meeting them where they are, how that is all infused throughout. But in terms of things that may have been missed in those preparation programs, gently saying, we know that's covered. We know we have to lead with trust, but in the thick and in the day of all the demands, going back and reorienting ourselves to that is key, and sharing that leading, and also directing the leading, but sharing that leading too with those responsibilities, and how that is just transformational to a school. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Yeah. And it's so easy to break trust. It takes a while to build it, and it just doesn't take very much to break it.
100%.
Any other last thoughts? And
I
yes,
do.
go Lakers. Go ahead.
I really appreciate it. And Samara, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And Brittany, I really appreciated what they shared about bringing what is important to their neighborhood, where they are, where they're living, and their ethnicity, and making sure that it connects with them and not just universal for everyone. And the other one that Brittany brought up is looking where the family is, what's going on in the households. When a student comes to school, you don't know what went on the night before, that morning, and you don't know what's going on, and to help, to try and focus in school when they have those issues. So it's really important to not get to know the children, the students, but also the family members and the friends, those types, and understand the community. So I really appreciated that. And thank you for sharing that. And it was enjoyable having Quentin on the line too.
All right. Well, we're past time. Good to see you, Quentin. We're just going to close with starting with Emily, just a final quick thought.
Yeah, as I was sharing with some of the consultants earlier as well, social emotional learning has become my life, and I could talk forever about it. But I just think one takeaway, or one thing I'd like to leave you all with is, as an educator, my biggest goal is to create a space in a world where my high school students are bombarded constantly with stress and anxiety and the expectations of the world, to create a space where they look forward to coming to every day, and where they feel safe and comfortable to share and to just be who they are. So that is one of my biggest goals as an educator, through and through. And this work, doing social emotional learning, has really just given me the platform to do that. So thank you all for listening and letting me share.
And Heather.
For me, I think a big focus is just bringing back the idea that primarily we work with human beings first, whether they're teachers or students. And I think a little bit of that got lost the last couple of years, and bringing that back to the forefront of our minds that these are people and they come to work or school every day with an entire life that maybe we don't know a lot about. And so that's where that empathy piece comes in, and just remembering that these are humans first.
For me, I think that there's just something, it's remarkable how it's not about children or adults, it's about human relationships. And I remember back in the day, I used to teach a lot of parenting classes around social emotional development learning. One thing I often heard was, hey, this strategy would probably work with my husband or with my wife, or, so thinking about, it's not just focused on children or on our employees, but it's really about how do we exist in the world. And I think that's hopeful for the world, that this is what drives us. And Gabe.
And for me, a reminder that leadership with trust always takes time. And as Zoltan mentioned earlier, it takes so much time to build, but it's also so very fragile. So it's something that we must always attend to, that we're leading in a world that requires us to continually build trust.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your always engaged participation. We have another one of these scheduled for the fall. So look to the PSD e-news for that. And thank you again for all your work with candidates, particularly in these trying times. So as Emily said, we are building the future of the teaching and educators course. So thank you for that.
Thank you all.